The still room at Wenderby kept the last light longest, and that was why she worked there past the hour anyone sensible had gone to bed. Grace Wexford stood at the long deal table with her sleeves turned back to the elbow, and in front of her sat 11 small pots without lids, each one holding a different failure. She had been at the still for 3 days. The Duke of Harlow's household had a still room the size of a chapel, and not one soul left in it who knew how to use it, and Grace had walked into it on her second morning the way a drowning man walks toward a spa. She had watched them all perform. That was the word for it, and no kinder word would do. In the long gallery at Farley, on the night the whole county came to be looked at, Grace had stood against the wall where the plain women stand, and watched every eligible girl in 3 parishes arrange herself for the Duke of Harlow. One sang, one fainted with great precision onto a sofa that had been placed, Grace thought, for exactly that purpose. One laughed at everything he said, including the things that were not funny, which was most of them, because the man scarcely spoke. And the Duke stood through all of it, with a face like a shut door, and answered when he had to, and looked more than once at the wall where nobody was performing at all. Grace was not performing because Grace had nothing to perform with. Her father was 3 months dead, and the debts he left had eaten the house, the horses, the good gowns, and finally her name, which was now attached in every drawing-room to the word pity the way a bad smell attaches to a coat. She had come to Farley because her aunt had made her come, and her aunt had made her come because a woman with no dowry and no beauty was still, at a stretch, a woman who might catch something if she stood in the right room. So Grace stood in the right room and caught nothing, and was glad of it, and watched the light move on the floor. "You are not dancing," said a voice at her shoulder, and it was his. She did not startle. That was the first thing he noticed about her, though she did not know it for weeks. Every other person he had spoken to that night had startled or brightened or arranged their face. Grace only turned and looked at him and said, "No, I have nothing to dance in and nothing to dance for." It seemed dishonest to pretend otherwise. Most people manage the pretense. Most people, Grace said, have the wardrobe for it. He looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable, and Grace looked back, because she had lost the thing that made a woman drop her eyes. When you have watched the bailiffs carry your mother's writing desk down the front steps, a duke's stare is a small weather. "What is your name?" "Wexford. Grace Wexford. You knew my father a little. Everyone did at the end." She said it without flinching, which was another thing he noticed. "You needn't be careful of it. I have had 3 months to get used to the shape of it in other people's mouths." "I was not going to be careful of it." "No," Grace agreed, looking at him properly now. "I don't believe you were." And that was the whole of their first conversation, because her aunt arrived at that moment in a rustle of borrowed silk to steer her niece away from the impossible extravagance of a duke's attention before it could be wasted. And Grace let herself be steered, and did not look back. And the Duke of Harlow watched her go, the way a man watches the one door in a burning house that is not on fire. Her aunt, Mrs. Pell, had a plan, and the plan did not survive contact with the Duke's steward. Mrs. Pell had monetized her niece the way a careful woman monetizes a length of good cloth left over from better days, turning her this way and that in the light, calculating what she might fetch. In the carriage home, she said the transactional truth aloud, because she believed it and saw no reason to dress it. "You will not get him, so put it down," Mrs. Pell said. "But he has a household falling to pieces, and a housekeeper dead at Michaelmas, and no one to run the still room or the linen or the accounts, and I have written to say you are practical and cheap, and have nowhere to go. You will earn your keep, Grace, since you will not earn a ring. It is that or my back bedroom and my temper, and you have sampled both." "I have," Grace said. "I'll take the still room. You will take what you are given." "Yes," Grace said, watching the dark hedges go by. "That has rather been the shape of things." So it was arranged, the way these things are arranged between women who need money and men who need the thing done and do not much care by whom. Grace Wexford went to Wenderby, the Duke's seat, 40 miles from anywhere she had ever been happy, to be neither guest nor servant, but the third thing, the useful gentlewoman, the one who eats in no one's company and belongs to no one's table. She arrived on a hot, bright afternoon at the beginning of August, with one trunk and a box of her mother's receipts, and the great house stood in its dry gardens, with half its shutters closed, and she understood before the door was opened that this was a house that had stopped. It had not stopped for want of money. Harlow had money. It had stopped for want of anyone who cared whether it went on. The fountains were dry and green at the bottom. The long borders had gone to seed and stalk. Inside, the rooms that were not shut smelled of a house breathing through its mouth, and the few servants who remained moved through it quietly, as though the master's silence were a sickness they might catch. Grace was shown to a small room and given a ring of keys by a butler who could not meet her eye, and left to find her own way to the work, which she did, because finding her own way to the work was the only thing she had left that no one could take. The still room, when she found it, undid something in her that the loss of the house had not. It was beautiful, and it was ruined. Copper stills gone dull, a great array of empty jars, a book of the old housekeeper's receipts in a hand so fine it hurt to read, and everywhere the ghost of a working room, the scale, the sieves, the little balance with its brass weights, the drying racks hung with nothing. Grace put down her box and turned back her sleeves and began, because a still room that has stopped is a thing that can be started, and she needed very badly to start something. He came upon her there on the 4th day, and it was strictly business, and it stayed that way for exactly as long as it took her to say something true. "Mrs. Pell wrote that you are practical," the Duke said from the doorway. He did not come in. "The accounts want a hand. The steward's books and the house books do not agree, and have not for 2 years, and I have not the patience to find where they part company." "Then they part company somewhere on purpose," Grace said, not looking up from the pot she was straining. "Books that disagree by accident disagree by pennies. Books that disagree for 2 years and never come right disagree because someone wants them to." There was a silence from the doorway. When she did look up, he was watching her with an expression she could not read, and would spend some weeks learning to. "You have not seen the books," he said. "No. But I have seen a man carry my father's furniture out a door, and I paid attention to how the paper went before it. Bring me the books, and give me a fortnight, and I will tell you where they part company, and whether it is theft or only muddle. I would not promise more than that without seeing them. And if it is theft, then you will know who to be angry with, Grace said, which is more than you know now. She set the pot down. Was there anything else, Your Grace? He looked as though there might have been, but he only inclined his head and left her to it. And Grace went back to her straining, and did not let herself think about the shape a man makes in a doorway when he is reluctant to go. The books came the next morning, carried by a boy of about 14 named Tom, who worked in the stables, and was, Grace gathered, the lowest thing in the house, and therefore the one sent to carry what no one else wished to touch. He set the ledgers on her table, and stood shifting from foot to foot, and Grace saw that his boots had been mended so many times they were more mend than boot, and that he was hungry in the particular way of a boy who is always given last. "Thank you, Tom," she said, and she cut a piece of the seed cake she had made to test the new oven, and put it in his hand without ceremony, and turned back to the books as though nothing had happened, because a kindness watched is a kindness spoiled. "Come back at noon and tell me if the oven's holding its heat. I can't be in two places." "Yes, miss," said Tom, and fled with his cake, and came back at noon, and after that came back rather a lot. She opened the steward's books, and she found, within the hour, the shape of the thing. His name was Mr. Rourke. The steward and Grace had not yet met him, but she met his hand on every page, and it was a confident hand, a plausible hand, the hand of a man who had run the estate through 2 years of its master's grief, and had grown used to no one checking his figures. She did not accuse him yet. She only read. And what she read was the slow, patient work of a man skimming a fortune he believed no one would ever count. But the accounts are the end of the story, and the middle of it was the garden. So let it be the garden a while. The Duke of Harlow, whose Christian name was Edmund, and who had not heard it spoken by anyone but his old nurse in 6 years, took to walking in the ruined gardens in the early morning, because he could not sleep, and the house was intolerable, and there, on a Tuesday, he found that someone had cut back the dead border along the south wall, turned the sour earth, and dressed it with lime from the estate kiln, and set in it a dozen small plants he did not recognize, in rows, with a stake at each end, and a name on a slip of paper tied to the stake in a plain, clear hand. He did not ask who. He knew who. He stood and looked at the turned earth for a long time, and felt something in his chest that he had thought had gone dry with the fountains. And he told no one, and the next morning he came back to see if anything had grown. Grace, for her part, did not know he had seen it. She had done it because the border was dead, and she could not bear a dead thing she knew how to bring back. "It isn't dead," she had said to Tom, kneeling in the dirt with her hands full of it, crumbling it under his nose. "Smell that. Sour. Not dead. Sour. There's a difference, and half the gardeners in England don't know it. Dead soil is finished. Sour soil is just angry. It's been shut up under those dead stalks, going acid for 2 seasons, and it wants 3 things, and they're not dear." She counted them off on filthy fingers. It wants lime to sweeten it. It wants turning, to let the air at it. And it wants a season, because you cannot hurry ground, Tom, no more than you can hurry bread. You give it those 3, and next spring this wall is roses, and the spring after It's roses you have to fight. Here." And she put the trowel in his hand and closed his fingers round it. "You do this row. Mind the depth. A hand's width down, no more, or you'll drown the roots when it rains." It was in this manner that the household began, one person at a time, to come round to her. The wound came to her in the 2nd week, and it came in the old woman's voice, because the old woman was the only one at Wenderby who still said what she thought. Her name was Mrs. Dabney, and she had been the Duke's mother's governess 40 years before, and when the mother died, she had been pensioned into a cottage at the edge of the park, and forgotten by everyone except Edmund, who visited her on Sundays and was scolded for his boots. She was not acid. She was tired and grieving still, and going blind by slow degrees, so that her bluntness was the bluntness of a woman who no longer had the sight to spare for softening things. Grace had taken to reading to her in the afternoons, because Mrs. Dabney's eyes had failed to the point where the print swam, and she loved her books with a helpless fury at being kept from them. "You've a plain voice," Mrs. Dabney said one afternoon, interrupting a chapter. "I like it." The last girl read as though she were performing at a fair. "Stop a moment, my eyes are swimming. Tell me a true thing instead, since you're one of the few here who will. What do you make of him?" "I make very little of him," Grace said. "He gives me work, and I do it. He's not unkind." "No, he's not unkind. He's worse than unkind. He's stopped." The old woman turned her clouded eyes toward the window. "Do you know what happened to him?" "No, of course you don't. No one tells you anything. They only warn you off him and never say why." She folded her hands. "There was a brother. Not dead. Everyone assumes dead. It would be tidier. Alive. Christopher. Younger than Edmund by 2 years, and cleverer and warmer. Everyone's favourite, mine included. God forgive me. And when their father died, and Edmund was 22, and had the whole of Harlow dropped on him like a fallen roof, Christopher came to him and asked for his portion early, to invest in a thing, a shipping concern. It doesn't matter what. And Edmund, who was drowning and frightened and too proud to say so, told him no. Told him no coldly. Told him he was a fool and a spendthrift, and would have his portion when it was due, and not a day sooner. And if he could not manage on a gentleman's allowance, he might learn to. Grace had put the book down. "Christopher went away," said Mrs. Dabney, "and did not write, and has not written in 6 years. He is in Lisbon, we think. He made his fortune without a penny of Edmund's, which is the cruelest part, because it means Edmund was wrong twice over. Wrong to refuse him, and wrong about the man. And Edmund has never once written to say so, because Edmund cannot say a thing like that. He has the words nowhere. He has spent 6 years being right about the estate, and wrong about his brother, and saying nothing to anyone. And he has turned to stone doing it. That is your Duke, girl. Not a tragedy. Just a proud, frightened boy who said one cold thing to the one person who loved him, and grew old, waiting to unsay it, and never learning how." "He could write the letter now," Grace said. "Could he?" Mrs. Dabney smiled without any pleasure in it. "You try telling him. You have a plain voice. Perhaps he'll listen to you, since he listens to no one else, and reads no books, and lets a stranger keep his still room, because it is easier than feeling anything about it. Read on. That chapter, not this one. And speak up, my hearing's going the way of the rest of me." That evening, Grace found, left outside the still-room door with no note, a set of brass weights for the balance. The exact set hers had been missing, the 2-ounce and the 1/2 ounce, without which she could weigh nothing finely. She had mentioned the lack to no one but Tom. She stood holding them a while, cold in her palm, and understood that he had heard, and had gone into some cabinet in that dead house, and found them, and set them down, and walked away. She did not thank him for it. She understood, without being told, that thanking him would end it. Their second true conversation happened over the books, and began as business, and did not stay there. He came at dusk to hear what she had found, and she had laid it out on the table in columns, the steward's figure beside the true figure, drawn from a source Mr. Rourke had never thought she would reach. "He is clever," Grace said. "I will give him that. He does not steal from the accounts, which anyone might check. He steals from the gap between the accounts and the world. Look, here he posts the north field at 40 bushels, the acre in a wet year, and pays the estate for 40, and sells 60, and pockets the 20. And who is to know the field made 60? Only the man who stood in it at harvest. Only the tenant. So," she laid down a small stub of paper, torn and dirty. "I walked out to Ackland's farm, the north tenant, and I asked to see his own counterfoil. His own stub, the one he keeps in his own kitchen, that Rourke never sees. And Ackland's stub says 60, in Ackland's own hand, 2 years running. Rourke's book says 40. The field kept the truth, Your Grace, because Ackland kept it, in his own house, where the clever man never thought to look." The Duke stood very still. "You walked to Ackland's. It is 4 miles. I have legs. You walked 4 miles to check a figure. I walked 4 miles because a figure that is wrong on purpose is worth 4 miles, Grace said, and because I did not want to bring you a guess. You have had 2 years of guesses. You may as well have one true thing." She straightened the papers. "It is theft, Your Grace. 2 years of it. I am sorry. It is always easier when it is only muddle." "Why are you sorry?" The question stopped her. She looked up, and he was closer than she had thought, and looking at her with the shut door of his face standing for once a little ajar. "Because," Grace said slowly, "a man who has already lost one person he trusted does not want to learn he has lost another. Even a steward, even a thief. It is one more door shutting in a house that is mostly shut already." She had not meant to say so much. She saw it land on him, saw him understand that she had seen more of him than the accounts. "Forgive me. That was past my place." "No," Edmund said. "It was not." And he did not leave for a while, and neither of them spoke of Rourke, and something in the room had moved that neither of them named. Now here is a question, and only a soft one, before the story turns hard. Wherever you are tonight, and I hope it is somewhere warm, with the lamp low and nothing needing you until morning, have you ever set a thing to rights in a place that was not yours, not because anyone thanked you, but only because you could not stand to watch it stay broken? Stay a while, if you have. This is a story for you especially, and the best of it is still to come. The night the rain came, they saved the harvest together, and nothing was said that could have been written down. It broke on the estate at the worst hour, a summer storm off the sea that turned in a night from blessing to flood, and the whole of the cut barley lay in stooks in the low fields, where 2 days of standing water would rot it black, Rourke was gone to the county town. Conveniently, Grace thought later. The field hands were scattered to their own cottages, and it was Edmund who came pounding on the still-room shutter at 11 at night, soaked already, because he had ridden the low fields and seen the water rising in the leats, and knew that the whole year's grain was 3 hours from ruin if the stooks were not lifted to the high ground. "I cannot ask the men out in this," he said. "Half are old. I will not drown a man for barley." "Then it's you and me, and whoever's fool enough," Grace said, already reaching for her cloak. "How many hands can you raise?" They raised 9. In the end, Grace and the Duke and Tom, who would not be left, and 6 others who came because Grace went to their doors herself, and did not order them, but asked them, wet through, by name. And they worked the low fields from midnight to first light, in the rain and the rising water, lifting the sodden stooks 2 to a man, and carrying them up the slope to the barn on the rise, back and back and back, until Grace lost count of the journeys, and her arms had stopped being arms, and become only the ache of the next load. Edmund worked beside her the whole night. He did not spare himself, and he did not command. He took the heavy end, and when a stook was too great for one, he was there without being asked. And once, when she went down to her knees in the mud with a load too big for her, he lifted it off her, and set it on his own back, and said nothing, and put out his free hand, and hauled her up, and let go the moment she had her feet, and they went on. They saved the barley. Not all of it. A corner of the far field was lost. But the harvest, the year, the thing that keeps 100 people fed through a winter, that they saved. And as the light came grey and streaming over the ridge, they stood in the door of the high barn, among the piled, dripping stooks, all 9 of them, too spent to speak. And Grace found she was leaning against the Duke of Harlow's shoulder, and that he had not moved away. The house came round to her fully after that, and 2 of them said so, awkwardly, in words. The first was Mrs. Gorrell, the cook, who had resented Grace from the first hour as an interloper in a kitchen that was the last thing she still commanded. 3 mornings after the flood, she stopped Grace in the passage, wiping her hands on her apron over and over, which was not a thing she needed to do. "That seed cake," Mrs. Gorrell said, to the wall a little to the left of Grace. "The one you made testing the oven. Tom's had a slice of it every day, and I want the making of it if you'll give it. My own's gone heavy these 3 years, and I can't find the fault." "It's the eggs," Grace said gently. "You're beating them cold. Beat them warm. Stand the bowl in a little hot water first, and they'll carry twice the air. That's your whole trouble. Nothing else." And then, because the woman's face had crumpled a little, with the relief of a mystery solved after 3 years of shame, Grace added, "You keep a good kitchen, Mrs. Gorrell. I've eaten in grander and worse fed. It only wanted one small thing put right, and now it is." "I said you were an interloper," said Mrs. Gorrell. "You did. You were quite right. I interloped straight into your still room." "Well," the cook's mouth worked, "you may interlope into my kitchen of a Sunday, and show me the eggs, if you've a mind." And she went off fast, before either of them could make more of it. And that was Mrs. Gorrell. The second was Tom, who was not awkward, because he was too young to have learned it yet, and who came to her one evening with something held behind his back, and his ears red. "Miss," he said, The border. The one by the south wall. There's a green thing come up. In the third row, where you let me do the depth myself. I thought it hadn't took. I thought I'd drowned it. You said mind the depth, and I wasn't sure I did. But it's come up, miss. It's come up green. And he brought his hand round. And it was not the plant, of course. The plant was in the ground. It was a drawing of it, in charcoal on the back of a torn feed bill. A careful, clumsy drawing of one small seedling, because he had wanted to show her, and could not bring her the earth. Grace looked at the drawing for rather longer than a drawing of a seedling strictly required. You did the depth exactly right, she said. That's why it took. Yours took, and 2 of mine didn't, if you want the truth of it. You've a hand for it, Tom. Some do, and most don't. She pinned the drawing to the wall above her balance, where it stayed. We'll want you in the garden come spring. I'll speak to His Grace. A boy who can get the depth right the first time is wasted mucking out. Tom left the still room, walking as though the floor were slightly further down than usual, and Grace turned back to her weights, and if her own eyes stung a little, there was no one there to see it, which was how she preferred her feelings, generally, to be arranged. And then there was an afternoon, one whole gold afternoon at the very end of August, that had nothing in it at all. It began because a jar of her mother's damson cheese, 3 years old and carried in the box all this way, turned out on opening to be perfect, and Grace could not eat a whole jar of damson cheese alone, and did not wish to, and the Duke of Harlow happened to pass the open still-room door, while she was standing over it with a spoon and an expression of frank greed. That, said Edmund, stopping, is a face I have not seen you make. It is my mother's damson cheese, and it has survived 4 counties and 3 years, and it is perfect, and I am deciding whether to be dignified about it. She held out the spoon. I have decided not to be. Here, you cannot get this. There is nowhere in England you can buy this. My mother had it off her mother, and told it to no one, and now it is only in my head, which is a foolish place to keep a recipe. But there we are. He took the spoon. He ate the damson cheese standing in the doorway of his own still room, and Grace watched him do it with her arms folded, and the particular satisfaction of a cook feeding a hungry man. And something went out of his shoulders that she had never seen leave them. Well, she said, you may not have the recipe, he said gravely. It is now a matter of estate security. I shall have it locked in the muniment room. You shall have it over my body. Sit down, Your Grace. You are blocking my light and hovering like a wasp. Sit. There. Now. She pushed the jar across the table. We will finish this, because it will not keep once opened, and it would be a sin against my grandmother to let it spoil. And you look as though no one has fed you anything for pleasure in a decade. 6 years, he said, and sat, and did not seem to notice that he had answered honestly. Nearer 6. 6 years is a long time to eat only for the fuel of it. She took the spoon back, and had her own mouthful, and passed it again. And they went on like that, sharing the one spoon between them like children, and it should have been improper, and was instead only easy. My father was the same at the end. Ate like a man, stoking a boiler. Forgot food could be a kindness. I think that is how you tell a house has stopped grieving properly, and started only enduring. No one cooks anything on purpose. Is that a still-room maxim? It is a Wexford maxim. We have very few, and they are all about food or money, which are the only two things my family was ever any good at, and we lost the knack of the money." She considered him. "You are smiling. You should do it more. It takes 10 years off you, and you have them to spare. There. Now you've stopped, because I mentioned it. You are the only man I ever met who can be argued out of a smile by having it pointed out. You are very rude to a duke. I am very rude to everyone. It is my one economy." She scraped the jar. "There. Gone. 3 years and 4 counties, and it is gone in an afternoon. And I am not sorry, because a thing kept forever is a thing never used, and my grandmother made it to be eaten, not to be a relic in a box." She looked up and found him watching her, with the door of his face all the way open now, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all, and the gold light lay across the table between them, and a wasp came in at the window, and neither of them moved to mind it. "Grace," he said. Only that. Her name, which he had not used before. "That is my name," she agreed softly, and did not make a joke of it, and let it sit in the warm air between them undefended, and the wasp bumbled at the glass, and the light moved, and it was, she thought later, the happiest hour she had been given since the bailiffs came, and it was made of nothing but damson cheese and a man learning to smile. But a woman in Grace's position learns not to build on gold afternoons, and 3 days later she understood all at once and completely that the thing she felt could never be had. It came on her in the ruined garden at dusk, with the first cool of September in the air, the first breath of the turning year, the summer going over. She had gone out to look at the border and found it thriving, the green things she and Tom had set standing sturdy in their rows, and she had felt the particular gladness of work coming right. And then, without warning, on the heels of the gladness, the truth. She saw it plainly, the way she saw a false figure in a book. He was kind to her. But look, Grace, at what the kindness was. He was a man who had refused his brother in his hour of need, and repented it for 6 years, and could not undo it. And here was Grace, practical, useful, in need, refusing nobody anything, mending his house and his accounts and his still-room and his very borders. She was the thing he could get right. She was the amends he could make, the door he could hold open where he had once slammed one shut. His kindness to her was not for her. It was for Christopher, for the brother in Lisbon who would not write, for the cold thing he had said at 22 and could not take back. She was penance in a plain gown, and a penance is loved the way a debt is loved, gratefully and never for itself. And even if she were wrong about that, even if there were something else in it, there was still the plain arithmetic she had spent her life doing. He was a duke. He would marry. He would marry a woman with a name, and a dowry, and a straight back, and the trained beauty to stand at the head of his table, one of the performers from the gallery at Farley. And he would be kind to Grace still, and give her a good place. And she would grow old in his still room, weighing his herbs, and loving him from 4 miles inside her own chest, where no one would ever have to be embarrassed by it. That was the whole of the future, laid out like columns. She could read it as clearly as she had read Rourke. She did not weep. She stood in the cooling garden and looked at the thing until she had the size of it, and then she named it to herself plainly, once, the way she named a loss, so that it could not creep up on her again. I love him, and it cannot be had, and I will not be a fool about it." And then she knelt down and put her hands in the border, and checked the depth on the plants Tom had set, because the ground did not care what she felt, and the work was still the work, and a woman must go back to the work or drown. When she went in, her hands were clean, and her face was steady, and she had put it down, and no one who saw her would have known she carried it, and no one reassured her, because no one knew, which was exactly how she had arranged it. Rourke came back from the county town to find that the useful gentlewoman had been in his books, and he moved against her the only way a clever, frightened man knows, which is to make her the thief before she can name him one. He was clever about it, as he was clever about everything. He did not accuse her to the Duke. He accused her to the house, quietly, the way you sour milk. A word to the butler that the new still-room woman had been seen walking out to the tenants alone, asking odd questions, that a quantity of plate was unaccounted for since her coming, that a woman with debts behind her and no character to lose bore watching. And he had a paper. Of course he had a paper. A man like Rourke always has a paper. He produced, at the right moment, an inventory of the still-room's silver in Grace's own hand. She had made it herself honestly, her first week, counting the plate as any careful housekeeper counts it, and beside it the present count, which was 3 pieces short, and the 3 pieces were, when the search was made, in the bottom of Grace's own trunk, under her mother's receipts, where she had most certainly not put them. It came to a head in the great hall, because Rourke wanted it public. A private accusation can be privately disproved, but a public one sticks even when it falls. He had gathered them, the Duke, the upper servants, 2 of the tenants brought up on some pretext Mrs. Pell sent for from her aunt's house 40 miles off, and arrived that very hour smelling of triumph and vindication. And Rourke laid it out in his plausible voice, the voice of a man who had run this estate for 2 years and expected to be believed. And at the end of it, he turned to the Duke and said, with every appearance of sorrow, "I take no pleasure in it, Your Grace, but the plate was in her trunk. I cannot make it not have been." The hall was very quiet. Grace stood where they had put her, in the middle of the stone floor, and understood that this was the room, and this was the hour, and that no letter was coming to save her, and no solicitor would rise with a paper, because there were none. There was only her, and what she knew. "May I speak?" she said. It was not a question. She did not raise her voice. She had never in her life raised her voice, and did not begin now. "The plate was in my trunk. Mr. Rourke is right. I cannot make it not have been, and I will not waste your time pretending some stranger climbed to my room to hide silver he might more easily have simply stolen. Someone put it there. Let us not argue about who. Let us argue about the inventory, because that is the paper that hangs me, and it is my own hand, and I will tell you exactly what is wrong with it." She held out her hand, and after a moment the butler put the inventory in it. "This is my count from my first week. 12 items. It is correct. I made it. Mr. Rourke sets it against a present count of 9, and says I have taken 3. But look at the paper, Your Grace. Not the figures, the paper. Look at the fold." She held it up to the light from the high window. "It has been folded twice, and the second fold is fresh. You can see the paper is still white in the crease, not grey with handling. I folded this once, in June, and put it in the still-room drawer, and it has lain flat since. Someone took it out this week and copied my count of 12, and then folded it again to carry it, and the new fold has not had time to dirty. That is one thing. She set it down. Here is the other, and it is the one that matters, and it wants no cleverness at all. Ask me to name the 12 pieces. I counted them. I held every one. Mr. Rourke has read my list. He can recite it too. But I can tell you which of the 12 has a bent tine on the third prong, and which salver has the Harlow arms worn near away on the left quarter, where a thumb has rubbed it 100 years, and which cup was mended once at the foot with a solder a shade too pale. Because I did not copy the count, I made it with these. She held up her hands. Send for the 9 pieces that remain. I will name every mark on every one before it comes through the door. Then send Mr. Rourke out of the room and ask him to do the same. A man who has read a list can give you a number. Only the woman who held the silver can give you the scars on it. They sent for the plate, and Grace named it. Every piece, every dent and worn arm and pale mend, standing in the middle of the floor with her eyes shut, before each was carried in and turned over and found to be exactly as she had said. And when it was done, and the hall was silent, old Ackland, the North tenant, who had walked up 4 miles that morning, not knowing why he had been summoned, stepped forward with his cap in his 2 hands. There's a thing I'd say, Your Grace, and it'll cost me, for Mr. Rourke holds my lease. His voice shook, but he said it. This lady walked out to my farm in June and asked to see my own harvest stub, my own count in my own hand, and I showed her, and it said 60 bushels off the north field, 2 years running. And Mr. Rourke's book, Your Grace, that I've set my mark to and never dared question, that book says 40. I'm no scholar, but I know what my own field give me, and I know who came 4 miles to ask, and it weren't him. He stepped back, shaking, having done the one brave thing of his life. And Rourke's plausible voice, when he reached for it, was not there. He began, Your Grace, this is a distraction, the plate. And the sentence had nowhere to go, because the plate was named, and the fold was fresh, and the tenant had spoken, and he could feel the room turning under him the way a man feels ice give. He appealed to his years of service, and the years fell on nothing. He looked from face to face, and found every face already decided, and the confidence that had been his whole position simply stopped working mid-breath, and what was under it was not wickedness, but a frightened man who had skimmed a grieving master's fortune because he thought no one would ever count, and had been counted at last by a woman he had taken for nobody. He did not rage. He went grey and quiet, and put out one hand to the table. Grace looked at him, and the room waited for her to finish him. And she found she could not, and that not finishing cost her more than any cruelty would have. You have a sister in Taunton, Grace said, only that. She had seen the letters in his desk while she read his books, and had wondered why she remembered it. And now she knew. Go to her tonight, before this becomes a thing the magistrates must hear of and cannot unhear. Go quietly, and do not come back, and I will not add my voice to what is already enough. She turned away from him, which was the mercy, to leave him something no one was watching. That is all I have to say. The low point came 2 nights later, in the small cold room they had given her, at an hour when the house was asleep, and there was no one to perform for, and no one to be brave in front of. She had won, and it had changed nothing, and that was the whole of the low point. Rourke was gone to Taunton. The books were being set right. The house knew her innocent, and half of it knew her a marvel. And Grace sat on the edge of the narrow bed with her one trunk packed at her feet, because winning had made the thing worse, not better. She could not stay now. Before, she had been useful and overlooked, and could have grown old in the still room, with her feeling folded small. But now he would be grateful. Now, on top of the penance she already was, she would be the woman who saved his fortune, and his kindness would double, and she could not live inside a doubled kindness that was not love. Better to go while it was only unbearable and not yet unsurvivable. Mrs. Dabney had come up, led by Tom, though the stairs were hard on her now. She sat in the one chair, with her blind eyes turned toward the sound of Grace's breathing. "You're leaving," the old woman said. It was not a question. In the morning, before he is up. I have written him a proper account of the books, so Rourke's mischief can be undone, and a note for Tom, and I have asked Mrs. Gorrell to see the boys put to the garden in spring. Grace's voice was quite steady. It is the right thing. A person should know when she has finished her work in a place, and go, and not hang about being thanked. Thanks are a kind of wage, and I have taken enough of his wages. "You love him?" Mrs. Dabney said. "Yes," Grace said, because there was no point lying to a woman who could hear it in a voice. "And it cannot be had, and I will not be a fool about it. And I have known that since the garden in September, and I have done my work anyway, which is the only dignity left to a woman in my position, to do the work and want nothing back. He will marry properly. He should. And I will not be here to weigh his herbs and watch it, because I am practical, Mrs. Dabney. But I am not made of stone. Whatever this house thinks it needs its women made of." She lifted the trunk. "The heart wants what it wants, and then the feet do what they must. My grandmother's other maxim. We are a family of maxims and empty purses." "Grace," the old woman began. "Don't," Grace said gently. "Please, don't tell me to hope. I've done the arithmetic. I always do the arithmetic. Good night, Mrs. Dabney. Tom will see you down." And she blew out the candle so that no one would see her face, and sat in the dark with her packed trunk, and waited for a morning she meant to leave in. But she had done the arithmetic with a missing figure, and the missing figure came down the corridor at first light in his stocking feet, having been woken by Mrs. Dabney's stick on his door at 5 in the morning, and told in words a governess uses on a boy of 6, exactly what a fool he was being. He found her in the hall with the trunk, in her cloak, her hand on the great door. The house was only beginning to grey. And the Duke of Harlow, who had not said a true thing aloud in 6 years, stood at the foot of his own stairs and tried to say one now, and was very bad at it, which was the truest thing about it. "You cannot," he began, and stopped. "The books. You have not finished the," and stopped again, because that was a lie, and they both knew it, and he had promised himself in the last 30 seconds on the stairs that he would not do this by lying. He started again. "No. Not the books. Grace, don't." His hands opened and shut. Servants were on the stairs now. Mrs. Gorrell, Tom, 2 housemaids, Mrs. Dabney at the top with her hand on the rail. the whole waking house drawn to the hall by the sound of a duke with no words. He looked at them and then at her, and made himself go on in front of all of them. Which was the cost? I am no good at this. Ask anyone. I said one cold thing once to a person I loved, and I have paid 6 years for it, and never once found the words to unsay it. So let me, before I lose them again. He drew a breath that shook. You are not a debt I am paying. I thought you might be. I watched myself be kind to you, and I wondered. But a man does not. He does not laugh over damson cheese at a debt. Stay, not as my housekeeper. I'm asking you to. I'm asking. That is all. I'm asking. Don't go before I have learned how to say it properly, because I will. Only it takes me a while, and I would rather learn it with you in the house. It was not eloquent. It was broken in 3 places and mended in none of them, and it was the first wholly true thing he had said aloud since he was 22. And Grace, who read false figures for a living, heard that it was true. You said my name, she said. In the still room, over the damson cheese. You didn't notice you'd done it. I noticed, he said. I have noticed everything. That is rather the trouble. The house settled around them the way a house does when the thing it has been holding its breath over comes right. Grace did not marry him that morning in the hall. She was too practical for a scene, and told him so, and he laughed, the second real laugh anyone at Wenderby had heard from him, and it did take 10 years off. But she took her hand off the door. Mrs. Dabney lived to hear the banns read from the top of her stairs, and died the following winter in her own bed, unsurprised, having said she would. Tom got his garden, and by the 2nd spring, the south border was roses you had to fight, exactly as promised. And by the 3rd, he was under gardener, with real boots, and a hand that could get the depth right every time. Mrs. Gorrell taught the new still-room girl to beat her eggs warm, and never once admitted where she'd learned it. Mrs. Pell went back to her back bedroom, and her temper, quietly tolerated, invited at Christmas, never quite forgiven, and made, on the whole, to feel it. And Rourke lived out an ordinary life in Taunton, keeping his sister's small accounts honestly, which was perhaps the only trade he had ever really known, practiced at last, where someone would have noticed if he strayed. And the letter to Lisbon was written that first winter, in Edmund's own hand, at the still-room table, with Grace across from him weighing lavender, and not looking up while he found the words, which took him most of an evening and 3 spoiled sheets. I was wrong, and I was frightened, and I said a cold thing because I could not say a frightened one, and I have missed you for 6 years and been too proud to write it. There is someone here you should meet. Come home, or let me come to you. Only let me unsay it. Christopher came home in the spring. But that is another gold afternoon, and not this story's to tell. The border by the south wall is roses now, the kind you have to fight, and every September Grace cuts them back herself, and turns the sour earth, and dresses it with lime, because ground does not care how happy you are, and the work is still the work, and it wants 3 things and a season, and she has, at last, the season. So here is the question this story leaves, and only you can answer it, wherever you are sitting tonight. Is there a border in your own life you have been calling dead, when the truth is only that it has gone a little sour from being shut up too long, and what might come up green, if you gave it lime and air, and one honest season. Think on it, and when you have an answer, come back, and I will have another story waiting, and the lamp still lit.